Hello, welcome everyone back to the Roots Run Deep podcast. Sorry we missed you in April, but here we are. It's May, and we're going to be talking about greenwashing. And we'll also get into some other terms like false solutions. But without further ado, my name is Rafa, just transition organizer for Urban Tilth, and I'm here with Kiara.
Hi everyone, I'm Kiara and I'm also a Just Transition organizer at Urban Tilth.
Welcome back, Kiara. It's always nice seeing you. So we're going to get started with a loose definition of what greenwashing means. I always feel like it's important for us to look into these terms in our own words just so they're a little bit easily digestible or understanding these terms when we're talking about it in these bigger spaces. I'm going to start with my definition, and my definition is the cover up of big corporations, right? So these big corporations usually cover up and hide a lot of the bad that they're doing by advertising green solutions or these green products, right? And I feel like with that, it could really damage and harm our communities and our environment. And it could get very difficult when trusting these bigger brands. But I don't know what you think, Kiara, but...
Yeah, for me, I feel like greenwashing, to put it simply, is like a really effective marketing technique. Kind of basically what you were saying about like hiding what is actually happening, but also presenting it as a good thing because of your use of like misinformation. You're allowing yourself to kind of like go under the radar and in a way like flip it to make it look like it's a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like it's always seen as that thing of like hiding it, hiding the truth. Kiara will read the definition that we found on the internet.
Yeah, so this one specifically comes from the UN. So their definition of greenwashing is by misleading the public to believe that a company or other entity is doing more to protect the environment than it is. Greenwashing promotes false solutions to the climate crisis that distract from and delay concrete and credible action. Greenwashing manifests itself in several ways, some more obvious than others.
Yeah, it sounds very technical, like a lot of big words, but I feel like it's the same thing that we were saying in the beginning. How it's a tactic for big corporations to still do things that, might get them a little bit more sales or, revenue or what's that word?
Profit?
Profit. There you go. More profit just to grow their business. And I feel like it's very common to see that, especially out here in the United States and in California.
Yeah.
In California, you can see it a lot. But how does that make you feel, Kiara?
I feel like especially like mentioning here in California, like because California is such a progressive state overall in comparison to a lot of other states in the US, I think people are like, oh, well, like it's more of a good thing than a bad thing because at least like there's some sort of like acknowledgement that there needs to be solutions for the climate crisis. But realistically, I feel like it's kind of the opposite because so many people in California tend to care about these things when it comes to like, climate change. It kind of like preys on people's like vulnerabilities, like, right? People want to be able to like buy more sustainably, to like do the thing that's more ethical. And so these companies kind of market it like, oh, we're doing this great thing. And it's like you're kind of just tricking more people into like buying your products. And I think that like, that then translates into like a lot of like distrust between buyers and companies, which overall is like not great. Just because then people don't really know who to trust and what to trust, and then it kind of just kind of gets rid of the whole purpose of what they're trying to do. Yeah, that's a long-winded way of saying that. I feel like it's just kind of like tricking people into buying stuff, even if they have really good intentions in making the purchases. It kind of takes away that like goodness that's behind those intentions.
I agree. It creates like a trust issue within ourselves, and it makes it a little bit harder when you're out there trying to shop sustainably. I feel like something that I feel all the time is like, it says organic, and I'm like, okay, that's good. That's always great. There's no pesticides being used, but then like also like trying to think about like how do you get that organic produce out there, especially when it's like a really big company. I feel like you still got to think about the labor that is being put into actually getting that produce out. But yeah, I do feel like it's a big thing that preys on people's vulnerability, like you said. And everybody's always trying to do good for themselves, so especially out here.
Yeah, and I also feel like with that too, it then creates a lot of confusion, and like that confusion also works against like the actual work that is being done to like create sustainable and like equitable solutions to the climate crisis. Because then if there's a lot of misinformation, it's hard for people to then like sift through all of it, and especially people, some people don't have the privilege of having all the time in the world to like look this stuff up all the time and like be as heavily invested. So it's like, yeah, it's just like a really unfair way of promoting a lot of harm to the environment.
It's like making it okay almost.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I feel like that's always like something that I like to kind of like have a conversation over when I'm talking about like like to people in the community, like how do you feel about greenwashing? I feel like a lot of people always give that feeling of like, oh, like sometimes it makes me like hesitant to buy stuff, or like like because I feel like we also live like in a very uh we see a lot of stuff on our phones, right? Like consumerism, and I feel like we tend to also get like the good things out of it. Like on TikTok, sometimes like they're like, oh, like don't buy from this company because there's this whole article that they read about, you know, them mistreating, whether it be their employees or, they're actually just lying about it being sustainable. And I feel like that's one of like the cool parts about social media too, but then like also we can't really believe everything that's on social media, so I feel like it still plays a role on like this whole thing of like, oh, like should I trust this place, should I not, you know but yeah, the community always feels that sense of like confusion, I think. And I want to take this time to also include the listeners to leave down their thoughts and in the comment section below, just how they feel about it when they hear about greenwashing, and if this is their first time listening or hearing the word greenwashing, like just how do you feel about it? And we're going to try to segue right now into how we see it in our community, because I feel like, yeah, having a definition is good, but also having like real life examples is always a good way to have people be a little bit more engaged and understanding of what's really happening around them. And one of the ones that we hear a lot of youth talk about that are about to graduate from high school, we hear them saying that they're going to get a scholarship from like Richmond Promise. And Richmond Promise is actually a program that is funded by Chevron, and they give money to these youth to actually pursue college, which in like just hearing it like that sounds like they're providing like these opportunities, but at what cost, you know? I feel like it is a great thing. If there's any fellow Latinos out there or Latinx people that are listening right now, I feel like we hear how our parents really want us to go to college, and, you know, they don't want to see their children cleaning houses or like, you know, working like very laborious jobs. And I feel like if they present that to our community like that, like, oh, we're giving you the opportunity to go to college by giving you this amount of money, I feel like parents tend to like gear towards it a little bit. But in reality, what that's doing is kind of like what we're talking about today, is that greenwashing. I feel like it's kind of taking your eyes and a lot of your energy out of seeing what they're really doing. I feel like the city of Richmond has been seeing a lot more flarings and actually speaking up on them, which makes it really cool to see our community like joining forces to, you know, report these flarings. And there's a lot of stuff that happens behind the scenes in Chevron that I feel like a lot of people are finally catching wind of it. And also, I forgot to mention that Richmond Promise actually started after 2012, after the explosion that happened, that created like that big black cloud in the air. I was actually like, I think I was like around 11 or 12 at that time when it happened. But yeah, I remember getting that scholarship myself. So it seemed like a really good opportunity, and it worked. It worked. That tactic worked. It feels like, you know, they were providing everything that I really needed at that time, coming from a background of not having that much money. And I feel like it's very common here in our community to pursue things that we really need, right?
Yeah. And I think the Richmond Promise is like a really good local example because, like you were saying, it really does kind of like, it's such a sneaky way of kind of like minimizing what Chevron does to the community and starting off with young people, like, you know, obviously like people who want to go to school, and if they can get any help financially, that's always welcome. So it's so like strange to see how they like shove this scholarship kind of like down the throats of like the students, because like at least I can speak for like at my school it was talked about a lot, and like I'm pretty sure the people who got it, like there was like a ceremony and everything, like it was enough where it was like it was somewhat of a deal. And like I personally didn't apply for it, which, you know, in a way I regretted because financially it would have been helpful, but I just at the time didn't really think about it too much. Instead, I actually ended up applying for a scholarship with Mechanics Bank. I don't know if that's still a scholarship that they like have, but at the time I applied to that, and you know, now that I'm a little bit older and I know more, I feel like Mechanics Bank in regards to like Chevron is a lot better in like the practices that they have. So it's like Chevron's promoting this scholarship, saying like this, like, you know, this is a great thing, and like without the acknowledgement that there are other ways, there are other resources. But again, because it's like the most accessible, it's the one that's like talked about the most and it's seen everywhere. It's kind of like, you know, most people just kind of go with the first one that's like there. So it's like just like interesting to see how like even that, when it comes to like greenwashing, like to choose the better option a lot of times requires a lot of work, requires a lot of like looking into the like background and the history, and it's like some people might not have that opportunities. So it's like you're already setting a lot of people up with like an unfair advantage over others. And just like, yeah, it's just interesting how that plays out. And it's like, it seems like a really small and simple example, but it's so prevalent where it's like, yeah, it's like, wow, they're really like kind of like showing up in all these places to kind of like trick people. And it's like, it's kind of disheartening because it's like, at what point like will they stop? And it's like to know that these companies don't care to stop is like another thing. But yeah, that's like a whole thing I could get into.
No, yeah, I agree. Like going back to that whole thing about these companies using our vulnerability to their advantage is this, like the Richmond Promise, and also a lot of the funding that they provide for Richmond High School's like engineering academy.
Mm-hmm.
I was part of the Richmond High Engineering Academy all 4 years of high school, and I feel like each year, like they, like our academy talked about Chevron as the people who are going to get you out of the hood. And sometimes like I was thinking like maybe I don't want to get out of the hood, like I just want to be here, but also yeah, I want to be an engineer. I want to build things that are like for my community and stuff like that. And then like I feel like when they present it to you is always like you're going to get a lot of money if you're an engineer. If you work for Chevron, you'll get a lot of money. And I feel like as people, yeah, like that are from low income communities, I feel like that just seems like a easy thing, like the easiest way to get to where we want to be to survive. And I feel like even looking at it now, like the majority of the jobs that are provided at the Richmond Chevron refinery, there's not a lot of Richmond residents there. But yeah, going back to like that whole thing, it's very sad to see how these corporations will use the things that we need to hide what they're really doing, just because I feel like if you're a listener right now and you guys are saying like you should be happy they're giving you money, I feel like that is exactly what Chevron says to all of the kids who are getting any funds from Chevron, whether it be from the scholarship or even just a program that they're funding at their school. And yeah, I'm glad that I got the money for going to school, but also living here for a while, I feel like low key, you guys need to give it to me. My lungs have inhaled plenty of toxic chemicals for me to not get anything out of it. I feel like that explosion that happened also piqued an interest on like environmental justice in me. And at that time I was like, what, 12? I think I was 12 or 13. And it made me realize that even when I was in high school, like, Chevron's not even the best.
Yeah.
But I'm going to take it because you guys are harming my community already. Like, I'm going to take the money.
Mm-hmm.
You guys owe it to us.
Yeah. And even like them owing us money, it's like, yes, they do have the scholarship, but it's like, it is nothing. It's not even a drop in the bucket in comparison to how much Chevron makes. Like, I encourage anyone listening to look up how much like the CEO of Chevron makes and in a year, and you'll be like shocked because it's like you can give out thousands of dollars to students and it's literally nothing to them, and they're not even really doing that, right? Like it's like they what they owe is not even in comparison to what they're giving. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And trust me, even if I bet you if you look up how much the CEO is making, you'll get a pop up of we're working on environmental management or maintenance. I actually visited their channel, not their channel, their website last week doing research for this podcast, and I saw that they were talking about environmental stewardship. And stewardship has like a very deep meaning to it. I don't know if you feel the same way, but for me, it means like you're building relations with your surroundings, And from, we know what Chevron does. There's no relations being built with the land that they're on. I don't feel like there's any respect in it. But while I was visiting that page and I got that pop up, I clicked on it, and it was like a little survey that came up as soon as I clicked on the stewardship of environmental stewardship, right? It said, "What brings you here? Are you a politician? Are you a community member? Are you just someone who's doing research? Are you a student doing research? Yeah, like research. What brings you here? And then there was the option of other. And I was just like, ooh, I'm not gonna click any of these, and I just clicked out. And it kind of like restricted you from immediately reading what they're doing for the stewardship or the environmental stewardship that they say they're doing. So yeah, I feel like they're hiding a lot, and it makes it hard for us to really know what's going on. And these like Richmond Promise funding programs at high schools, these are all little tactics to just get our minds off of it, get our eyes off of what's happening on the other side of that fence. Yeah. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about how also Chevron is trying to move towards producing hydrogen. And I feel like that is like a really big topic right now in greenwashing. Just because I feel like it's the future. Everybody's saying it's the future. There's no emissions in hydrogen, but it's the production of hydrogen that really affects the way that the color grading might get, or I don't know how to explain that part really.
Yeah. So like for anyone who's not familiar with like hydrogen fuel, there's like a color coding system. It's really something. Basically each color is supposed to tell you like the level that the hydrogen was produced at and like how it relates to being either like green, which is supposed to be seen as like the best. It's like the gold standard. It's what you want. It's supposed to be the most clean versus like, I think brown is at the bottom. I'm not sure exactly. I can look up the.
Yeah, I think there's like 4 or 5 different color codes, but the ones that are supposed to be green or the I think the one that I really want to focus in is the green hydrogen. And I feel like the byproduct of what people are calling green hydrogen is not actually green.
Yeah, and on that note too, these colors, everyone has a different like color scale. There's like lists that have like orange, there's some that don't. This is not something that is like regulated or like standardized by like any sort of official like government agency. It's just kind of it's like a pretty concrete way of greenwashing. It's just something that was kind of made up, and it's something that they stick by, and there's not really a way to like actually define it. So anyone like Chevron, any like sort of oil refinery can literally be like, we have green hydrogen. And there's no way of saying that that's not true because they're the ones who set that standard.
If you gave the community an opportunity to actually create the color coding, I feel like it would be a lot more different. But because we're not researchers in like these like academic spaces, I feel like it makes it hard for the definition of what green hydrogen might really be. And I kind of want to bring up where they were proposing a hydrogen hub, and I believe it got passed.
Yeah.
But this hydrogen hub was really pushing the idea of it being green because they were going to use the waste from the, what do you call that again?
The bio waste from the landfill.
Bio waste from the landfill, yeah, to produce the hydrogen. And the way they were going to do that is by burning the trash, right? And and I feel like Kiara might know a little bit more just because she was part of that project a little bit more.
Yeah, so like to not get too technical because I myself am not a scientist in any capacity, so I don't know exactly like the ins and outs of the technology and stuff, but basically the machine is like you put in the bio waste and according to them it's not burning it, so there's not supposed to be really any emissions, but based off of what I've seen and like researched and talking to other people who understand it a little bit more, there's just a lot of unknowns because this is a completely new type of technology and it's not something that's been like heavily researched by anyone really. So it's all just speculation basically. They are allowed to say that they're not releasing any sort of gas or anything, but there have been some studies that suggest that things like methane, things like carbon could kind of get released. Although with the carbon, it's complicated because a part of the machine is also there's a carbon capture like system within it. So it's supposed to capture all the carbon before it's released into the air. But again, you get into like the technicalities of like what sorts of pipelines and vents and stuff are a part of this machine. Are they actually made to like be able to keep stuff like hydrogen from being released into the air? And hydrogen specifically is really, really hard to like test to see if it's being released because like atomically it's such a small thing where like any tiny little hole like hydrogen can be released, and hydrogen being released is like a huge concern because greenhouse gas emissions, like it's just not something that you want just being released consistently into the air. So it's just kind of this idea of like, sure, it might be something that's like worth kind of like investigating, but at the same time it's very like related to the idea of like false solutions, and in just transition we use that a lot because it's saying that this is the solution without being sure of it, without there being a guarantee. It's kind of just like, okay, we think it's going to work, but we don't know. And that's how a lot of companies get away with like doing a lot of harm to the environment, and especially in areas where like that's already an issue because it's like, well, you already have all this pollution, like, and we're saying that this is going to be better. Wouldn't you rather take this option than the like pollution? And it's like the idea is really like they shouldn't be doing any of it. Like it should just stop. But companies want to like really push this idea of like innovation and a technology, and I'm all for that, but also there needs to be a huge like skepticism to it, because to just let things kind of keep happening without any regulation is also like a cause for concern. Yeah, I totally forgot where I started with that. I just went on a tangent.
No, I feel like you have a point there when it comes to just going back to what you said about false solutions. I'm kind of glad that you brought that up just because like I do feel like it coexists with greenwashing. And for those who may not know, I do think it's a very common term that we use in just transition. And it coexists with greenwashing because a lot of these things that people are proposing, or not people, but these corporations are proposing, are like false solutions for what they're really doing. to our community, the harm that they're doing to our community. So thank you for bringing that word up, or that the term up, because I feel like moving on with like the next example, I feel like it's gonna make a little bit more sense. But yeah, hydrogen, I feel like it's a lot. It's a lot to take in when it still feels like a lot of the research is really new. And I feel like there's different colors being proposed in different states as well. And shout out to the Climate Justice Alliance when I went back in, I believe it was 2022, when we first got hired in October. They talked about a lot of the research that is happening, or that was happening, and at that time was like everyone was racing, like environmental justice researchers trying to like get the color coding down before these really big corporations could color code themselves. And I feel like it was a very important time to try to like enforce what we really wanted the color code to be, and identify what green hydrogen might look like. But I feel like it's still not concrete, like to the T, or like that everyone follows the same color coding. And going back to like what you said about like it's hard to detect hydrogen, a leakage of hydrogen, I feel like a lot of the trauma that we have in Richmond is explosions, and hydrogen being very flammable, extremely flammable, and that being another source of an emission that could possibly happen, or like a leakage, explosion, etc., is a little scary when it comes to thinking about how close we are to the landfill as well. I feel like it's all along the coast, and I feel like that's like the coast of pollution, because it's like there's nothing that's like really like regenerative in that area. I feel like it's just landfill, Chevron, and yeah, I feel like it can trigger a couple of us to, or like the community to not want that to keep happening, right? And the funny thing about this corporation that we're talking about, I don't think we're allowed to say their names,
Probably not, just to be
but
safe.
yeah, just to be safe. But this corporation actually tried to associate themselves with being green by saying that like Urban Tilth could like send the food waste that we have, so we can contribute to producing that hydrogen. And I feel like that that kind of sucks when it comes to like using our name as like grassroots organizations to try to like I feel like that is one of our things that we're kind of worried about, like food waste. And they know that that's a vulnerable topic for us, to then like just be like, like I got you, like don't worry about it, like this is gonna be great. In reality, it's all for profit.
Yeah, I think that's like what happens with greenwashing in general too, and it's like this is a good example of it. It's like there's a lot of gaslighting that happens in the process. Being in those like situations where you're talking to the CEOs, the CFOs, the presidents of those companies, and telling them your concerns, and they're just like, oh no, like we're gonna be great neighbors. The good neighbors term is tossed around a lot, but it's like they are actively not being good neighbors. They're being very bad actors in these situations. So much so that they had ties to Chevron and were constantly negating that they were tied to Chevron. Like, you would bring it up and they'd be like, no, we're not. No, we're not. You can look on the Chevron website and find them. They are. So it's like, it's just kind of insane to like see how far people are willing to go to like, you know, keep these companies safe and like have their fair share of their cut in the profits. Yeah.
Definitely. I feel like it kind of just like makes you see the true colors of like these like super fun sites, or like these areas that like have like extremes amounts of money that kind of makes no sense for them to have that much. But like they have power with that money to like, you know, hide things, or, you know, not to sound like a conspiracy theorist or anything like that, but it does feel like they have the power to, even if like they came to they got sued, right? You know, I feel like extracting some money from them doesn't really make a dent, right? But yeah, I do feel like hydrogen is one of those big topics, and we're not getting too technical with hydrogen just because I feel like that research is still being conducted to a point where we could actually understand it, and, you know, how like creating a solution for it. The only solution that we know is that we just don't want it to be harmful for not just our community but the environment, you know.
Yeah. And I think that's where like a lot of the frustration also comes from, of like all this is being moved forward very quickly because of the idea that it's supposed to be clean and renewable, and it doesn't give, you know, people like us who are like new and hearing all this for the first time, and I don't understand all the like science behind it, like it doesn't give you time to catch up. And they're just pushing forward like faster than ever, so much so that like this isn't just something that's happening here in Richmond, it's happening in a lot of places in the Bay Area. And just recently, I think it was earlier this week, I was made aware of a proposed pipeline that they actually want to build. It's called it's referred to as the Montezuma pipeline, which would connect like all the refineries that are planning to move to hydrogen and collect all the CO2 emissions, the CO2 that we were just talking about, that carbon capture. And this is like a huge, I think it's like 5 miles or something long. And like, you know, that's a concern because, you know, pipelines, like you have to literally like excavate so much land, and that's going to just stay there. And there has to be like a really like strict maintenance and like regulations around it. And if not, then it's just going to be even more detrimental. So it's like all this stuff is just happening, and it is overwhelming. And I apologize for like making it maybe even more overwhelming. I don't want to do that, but it is important to like bring up and know that there's so many different parts to it, because it kind of makes you just realize like I only know a little bit and there's so much more to know. And yes, that can be frustrating, but also it's like, at least I see it as like a motivation to like keep learning, keep figuring it out, and like talking about it, at least even if I don't understand it completely. I think it's good to just try and talk about things. I don't think you have to be an expert about anything to like talk about it. So that's why I love like, you know, having this space for us to be able to do that.
Yeah. I feel like it's that thing of like, you know, as long as you're talking about it, I feel like you know what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because we know exactly what is harming us. You know, like we don't need to use a fancy word to say that you're harming us, but you're harming our lungs, you're harming our community, our environment, you know. And right now when you're talking about excavating and everything, I kind of want to bring up like development.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I feel like that's another thing that we face in our community that can be seen as a false solution, as greenwashing, depending on their agenda. I feel like the majority of the development being proposed in North Richmond, and Richmond just being heavily industrial zoned. I feel like the development being proposed is mostly like warehouses, and I feel like that could also create more emissions, right, with the big vehicles that they have. And when these developments actually propose these projects to the city or the North Richmond Mac, I feel like they tend to use the idea of economics, and be like, oh, we're going to provide jobs for you guys, right? And I feel like it's usually a very small percentage. I think it's like 2 point something percent of like the jobs that are actually going to go towards community members. And it varies with whatever they agree on. It's not like always 2%, right? But I feel like that is one of the things that are considered a false solution to, they're kind of just like, we'll give you a little bit of something if you let us build the whole thing here. And I feel like one of the developments that we're still trying to figure out, like the situation that's there, right? I feel like it's Center Point. Center Point is right across from our North Richmond farm. It's on Brookside Drive, and that lot has so much contaminated soil.
Yeah. For me, it's just kind of like, it's a hard situation because, again, like, basically the soil, there's a lot of like heavy metals, so things like arsenic and lead. I know lead is usually the one that most people are familiar with as being toxic because it was used in like a lot of things back in the day, like paint and stuff, and obviously we don't do that anymore because of all the like health risks it has. So it's like all that soil is just contaminated and it's just sitting there. And, there's issues of like groundwater rising and like sea level rising. So it's like the groundwater is then going to become contaminated, and it just has so many ripple effects. And at the same time, it's like, how do you truly like get rid of that soil in a way that's actually safe for the public and like the residents in that area? I cannot answer that. I don't know the exacts of like what would be the best way, but it's just really sad, honestly, to like have to think like that of like, okay, you have to maybe choose one bad option over another bad option, like the less worse over the worst. And yeah, it also just kind of like, I don't know, it just kind of reinforces, I think, a lot of the times that idea of like there's not much that can be done, which is like a shame because there is something that can be done. Obviously, like, yes, there are ways to like have those sites cleaned up, and I think there can be probably a lot more done than what is like usually proposed. And that's the thing, like when it comes to these big companies, it's the holding them accountable and them actually like being accountable is the really difficult part because, laws only require so much. So the rest is kind of just extra work. The fleets, for example, like that's something that like some folks from Urban Tilth and like just a bunch of different people like came together to kind of try to like get that instilled in like these permit approvals for these different companies, and it's called a moratorium. It's something that was in place. I'm not exactly sure how that works in regards to like the future moving forward, but this company, yes, they're gonna have to in 5 years when they start production change their fleets to all electric. But like Rafa was saying, it's like 5 years is a long time to just be kind of living with the consequences of like all these like super like those giant trucks like coming in and out of that area, all that like smog and gas and North Richmond being an already overly polluted area, this just adds to it even more. And it's like, I don't know, it's like there can be so much more being done, but we're kind of being forced to kind of just like be happy with the bare minimum, kind of like we were saying with the Richmond Promise. It's like we're giving you at least something, you should just be happy about it. But it's like we shouldn't. We should be allowed to like actually advocate for what we want and be like pushing for like big changes. And like that's what I think greenwashing does. It kind of like makes you settle and be content with like small changes. But then you realize that those small changes aren't even like as impactful as you think. And so it's like, how can we like move towards making those like bigger changes? And like, yeah, I don't know where I was going with this, but yeah.
Oh yeah, I think that you were stating some pretty good things about how like yeah, I feel like we need to organize as community members, not just as organizations, but as residents in the community to, you know, push for like these like more stricter policies of like, you know, permits for the development. I feel like we could push for a lot more, and we really just need that community engagement in these spaces like the North Richmond Mac meetings and anywhere where like the proposals are happening. I think it's very important to have everyone's voice heard. And yeah, like I feel like right now bringing emphasis about like the contaminated soil, I feel like also thinking about the heavy rains that we got last year and a little bit about a little bit this year. I feel like those contaminants could easily like wash around. Yeah, they're heavy metals, but like, you know, you could, some water could actually shift some heavy metals, you know. And I feel like bringing emphasis into one of like the most vulnerable spots is like right behind it. It's a elementary school. But the elementary school has like a fence, like two fences that are not even like a mile away. Probably I would say like about 10 yards away from each other. Yeah, 10 yards from each other to, you know, there's not a lot of protection there. And when we're talking about like the cleanup process for those contaminated soils, you know, we start thinking about like how the air might also contribute to polluting or harming other community like sensitive receptors, right? I feel like there's a park there, we have our farm there, we have a lot of community like hubs that are like, or like, you know, they're hubs for a lot of the community, right? Like at that Lucky's Ace Park, you know, we have t-ball practice with all the young kids, and thinking about like how there could be lead in the air that could potentially like carry into their lungs or anything that's harmful for them, you know? Yeah. And it kind of makes me a little sad because after, let's just say that they did agree on, which I don't think they did, but for a full cleanup, I believe that right now the idea is to clean up half of it or a little bit more than half and just cap the rest into these like underground vaults and them just like keep monitoring them over the years. And I feel like if they were to do a full cleanup, like where would these contaminants go, right? Yeah. And I feel like I heard somewhere, I don't know if it's true, that they usually go like more towards like these desert areas, like New Mexico or Nevada, right? But it's usually placed in other unincorporated communities. just how North Richmond is unincorporated. But then you start thinking about like how like that's usually like the indigenous communities that are in those areas, and you just keep polluting their water, their lands, and it just we're trying to figure out what's the real cleanup. Where do these like metals, these heavy metals, actually like go away and not exist to where they harm us. And I feel like with research about mushrooms and plants that I could actually like break down these heavy metals, it'll take more than decades to like do a full remediation of that land with those plants. But I do think that would be a really cool thing to like move towards. Like I feel like the earth knows what to do, and we kind of just need to keep encouraging that idea. But also I do think that like because everything is so like it's a product, like that land is a product that you can buy. People just look for the easiest solution, which might be a false solution, like that cleanup process. But yeah.
Yeah. And I think to your point too about like finding ways for like the earth to like heal itself using other things like plants and mushrooms and stuff, it's a great way of thinking of it. And I still like I still want to like mention that that's like the whole issue with things like this, with contaminated soils and just like all these like really harsh chemicals, all the greenhouse gases, all these things that are like being polluters to the earth. Once it's there, it just doesn't disappear. Like it's not something that will be just taken away, right? Like these plants may be able to take it out of the soil, and then those plants themselves will be contaminated. So it's like my caution is around like even pushing for things to be made in the first place, like because you have to then deal with the consequences at some point, and it's not fair that those consequences are always dealt by the people who are like already suffering the most. Like you saying, like there's a school right there. Like it's just that area is an area where like we're trying so hard to like make it for the community, like just a beautiful space for people to come and like hang out and just walk around and play games and sports at the park and go to their school. And it's just all these things are happening, and then it's also like they're planning on building a giant warehouse on that land either way. So it's like even with the cleanup, even if it were to be like completely done, like the company at the end of the day wants to put in a warehouse to just, I don't know, sell products, e-commerce, whatever it is that they do, rather than thinking of it as like, let's put affordable housing. Like nobody wants to do affordable housing. Nobody wants to like put in solar panels so that they don't like take out more energy from the grid. And maybe if anything, they could be selling it back and making, electricity cheaper for everybody else. Nobody's doing that. It's just these like tiny little like things that are supposed to like make us happy and keep our mouth shut. And it's like, that's not enough.
And I feel like as much as this podcast might make people, or like this episode might make people a little sad, because I feel like it wasn't until like I started paying closer attention to what's really happening in our community, I actually saw how bad it was, and I already knew Chevron was bad, but putting more time, which I feel like it's easier for us to do just because it is part of our job, and majority of our community is in survival mode. I feel like it's right now, like doing this podcast, people listening are actually getting educated in our community, while they also have the opportunity of still like multitasking. Whether it be you're listening to this on a drive to work, or you're an Amazon driver and, listening to this podcast, or pizza driver. It doesn't really matter. Or you're just at the gym working out, listening to this podcast. I feel like it's very helpful to get that information out. But also, I understand why most of our community tends to not be part of these spaces, not because they don't want to, but because it's really hard to actually push for that. But if there's not anything else that you want to add on, if there's anything else you want to add on, if not, then we can just move on to like the last section, and it's kind of just like re-asking, or bringing up the question again of leaving a comment. We really want the listeners to be involved in these conversations, not just listening to us, but also be in this space and actually communicating with other community members about how you guys feel. I feel like it's very important to build community. So I'm taking this time to, remind y'all to leave a comment and tell us how you see greenwashing in your community. We might have missed a couple examples that you might want to talk about more, or, how it makes you feel listening to everything that we talked about today. I feel like there's space to still leave comments about anything that you want. I feel like as long as we're communicating in the comment section, I feel like it's helpful. Whether it be, like, how do you see it, or how do you feel about it?
And also, like, I don't know, maybe this can be like considered another example, but I also want people to like realize that, yes, we were talking about a lot of like big scale things, but there's a lot of ways that like these things affect us in like everyday instances. One that I always think of, because I'm really passionate about it, is like sustainable fashion. And, we all wear clothes. So I think it's something that most people can relate to. And so like what happens a lot with like in terms of greenwashing is like these big companies, we see it all the time. I'm pretty sure like, the most like mainstream companies, things like H&M and stuff, tend to like be like, oh, we're coming out with a sustainable line, and it's really not. Oftentimes they're allowed to say that because maybe, I don't know, 50% of the fabric is like reused plastic, recycled plastic. For folks who don't know, like certain materials like polyester and acrylic are derived from plastic, and plastic is derived from oil. So these big oil companies have actually a lot of interest in making these products and selling it, and kind of continuing people to purchase just these really like harmful products. And I don't know, I feel like it's something that's like, it's very complicated. Obviously, like, I don't think that we should be, what is the word I'm looking for? Policing. I don't think we should be policing people and the purchases that they make, because you don't ever really know until you actually know the person. So you can't really make snap judgments. But I think it's good to kind of just like consider in a way the ways that you can and do have like autonomy and like responsibility that you can carry, because I think a lot of times we hear about these terrible companies doing these things and it's like it feels like you can't do anything about it. But I do encourage people to kind of look at it, a little differently and shift your perspective. I think there is a lot that we can do individually, and I don't think it's something that has to be something that, it feels almost detrimental. I think there's a lot of back and forth with like, people should be allowed to enjoy themselves versus people's like responsibility. I think there's always like a middle ground for stuff. And yeah, so it's just like things like, I don't know, the next time you go to the store, like just take a look at the tag and see what kind of materials you see. You might end up buying the thing with polyester in it, but it's always just important to have the mindset and just kind of like go into things being a little bit more curious. So if any of you have any experiences like that, or like have similar examples that maybe people can like kind of take a look at or like investigate a little bit more, always like feel free to like, yeah, drop those comments, talk to us, reach out to us. Like we're always down to talk about these things.
Yeah, shout out to Cooperation Richmond. We've been recording here consistently the last 3 episodes, and it's been very helpful to have a space like this. It's very nice, open space. If you guys haven't had a chance to check it out, you guys should. I will put the address in the description down below. So I don't have it right here in front of me. So yeah, till the next one.
Bye.
See ya.